me conduit chaque
customary practice brings me at the beginning of every year, in spite of all the episodes and crises, to devote time to our armed forces, and I'm pleased that this meeting is being held this year in this impressive airbase at Mont-de-Marsan. As often on these occasions, it's an opportunity to take stock of the past year, to pay tribute to the efforts and sacrifices of our military personnel before highlighting some of the major events in the coming years. These regular meetings allow me to say how much the nation places its trust in you. We appreciate your selflessness, the commitment of those who support you, the bravery shown by our wounded, and the energy of those who care for them, as well as the resistance and commitment of your families. For me, it is always an opportunity to be at your side, over and above the formalism of the military occasion. But today is somewhat of a special occasion because I've come to talk to you also about the future of our armed forces. 2 months ago in Toulon, I presented the vision of the National Strategic Review for our country. Now I'd like to address before you the way in which this vision must take shape through the military planning law, whose draft will soon be presented to Parliament. And at the outset, I'd like to point out before you how much the exercise that has been undertaken is exceptional. For the first time in decades, it follows up the flawless execution of the previous law, and that thanks to the commitment of the ministry and our MPs, and I thank them for that. Exceptional through the depth of the work of discussion and reflection that galvanized a lot of energy and conducted by all of you. I'll return to that. But today, I'd like to address both you and the nation as a whole. Firstly, because the military planning law reflects the efforts of the country in favor of its armed forces, and these efforts will be on a par with dangers. That's to say, considerable, because this exercise comprises in its instrument and its implementation, the mobilization of all. This planning law is the path to which we will commit. It is the major strategic initiative based on our specificities, threats and vulnerabilities, embody and present decisions which commitment for decades. After strange defeats and unexpected setbacks, the basis is a clear idea. Never be behind in a war, never attempt to win intellectually the next conflict, but ensure the country is ready for the next one. We must be one war ahead. This military planning law will have to draw the conclusions of the seeds of our time with, of course, this portion of cunning of history that we can never predict. But I'd like to reassure you by saying that faced with the changes of war, France has and will have armed forces ready to meet any peril. As detailed in the strategic review, threats are multiple and tend to aggregate. High-intensity warfare in Europe, crisis of multilateralism. There's no peace dividend because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and before us we see the brutal costs of the violence of our time in Europe, Asia, and the Indo-Pacific. This order is giving to a state between nations that we have never seen before. The Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, or the shores of Taiwan, amongst others, are the source of regular tension. Our overseas territories are increasingly exposed, and conflict is present in all areas, including the internet, social networks, and the impalpable field of information. The emergence of new threats linked to global changes, climate, energy, technology, with risks of destabilization that they may cause. Lastly, risks persevere, those at low noise, those of terrorist attacks and jihadist violence, although resorbed, have not disappeared. What characterizes our decade is this accumulation of threats of all orders in all geographies, like a form of anthology of war risks that have tempted many generations before us. Unbridled warfare, terrorist violence, old wars, others more recent, which added together can feed on one another. These forms of conflicts assume a new phase which oscillates between sophistication and brutal simplicity. Sophistication with a technological race from cyber to quantum, tomorrow with artificial intelligence and naked brutality in Ukraine, with a return of scene that we thought belonged to the imagery of Verdun or the Somme. Global rearmament is therefore happening at the two ends of a polarized spectrum between high and rudimentary technology that can threaten a well-equipped army but vulnerable at the top and bottom of its course of action. One of the pitfalls would be to seek technology refinement, and the other would be not to invest in new resources. This new conflicts, in spite of our intelligence, are very diffused and undermining an already weakened international order. The violence of the world has retained its surprises. Tomorrow's operations will be the live rehearsals of practiced exercise. We must focus on swiftness, swift ramping up to meet the challenges, because we will not choose the conflicts that we will have to face. What characterizes the new conflicts of our century is probably the blurring between open, explicit conflictuality and pernicious malevolence. War is no longer declared, but it is insidious and hybrid. The targeting of civilian infrastructure is our common lot. Cyber attacks, because our armed forces are made up of men and women in a changing societies, we must draw the conclusions and have heightened vigilance and an ability to resist in all areas of society. Let's never forget that our nation is an archipelago, and if the security of the mainland is ensured by all of you, our overseas must never leave our gaze and presence, and the March of the World places many of the territories in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean in the front row of tomorrow's conflicts. From this picture of perils, it's logical to deduce the risks and to identify areas of actions. We must plan, anticipate for the coming world, even if existing systems must be changed. Drones invest in quantum, not just believe in human intelligence, even if it remains intelligence, but to leverage it through artificial intelligence and to maintain our personnel with its moral strength. The 2019-2025 law had a clear purpose to repair armed forces, give them the necessary energy and resources, turn the page on penury and find new ways of action. Thanks to the vigilance of your leaders, this endeavor is making progress, thanks to the fact that all these commitments were respected. This work must continue. I saw this through my many visits, the difference that this substantive effort brought about in tangible terms. The new military law plans to continue and develop and amplify this process. Having repaired the armed forces, we will transform them. We must have a march on time. The nation must transform its armed forces by relying on the excellence of its military personnel and dedication. But as a nation, we must transform ourselves, be ready for more brutal, more numerous, and more ambiguous wars. It's this high ambition set out in the military planning law. To respond, we need major resources, whereas the previous plan, 2019-2024, represented an effort of 295 billion euros. I can tell you that we will ask Parliament to devote for the period 2024 to 2030, a budgetary effort of 400 billion euros, which will enable us to cover a total of 413 billion euros in military requirements to renew our military capability, which serves our security, our prosperity, and our place in the world. All in all, these two military planning laws will lead to a doubling of the budget of our armed forces. I say this with gravity. These are considerable resources that amplify a defense effort whose dynamic is unprecedented over the past 5 years. These exceptional resources dictate a major requirement. It's the price of the security of our children to hold our rank, defend our values, a long tale of glory and liberty whose new chapters need to be written. We must cross this major milestone to build our armed forces of tomorrow, even if it only a milestone, because these 413 billion will not draw the new face of our armed forces for the new century, but begin a major investment, a profound change, which will then be irreversible. We must not, however, do the same with less. We must do better and differently. The war doesn't wait on us. We must maintain our rank. Our challenge for tomorrow is firstly to continue to defend interests that are unchanged, the defense of the national territory, our overseas territories, our citizens, the security of our neighboring from the Balkans to the Middle East, Africa, and the fight against climate change. of course, and to adapt to the modern requirements of robust and credible nuclear deterrence, defending our interests in new forms of conflict where the rule of law is not respect with, where there are threats to our future. It is to think differently about our partnerships, our alliances, whilst maintaining our position as leader in Europe and NATO, to leverage the exceptional relations with countries such as Greece, Egypt, the UAE or India. Build defining partnerships such as those we have with Germany, and on Sunday with Chancellor Scholz for our traditional Franco-German Council present this, and with the United Kingdom and with Prime Minister Sunak, we'll be holding our bilateral summit in a few weeks, or with Italy and Spain, with whom we've just signed a cooperation and friendship treaty renewing the framework of our defense relations dating back to the 80s. Lastly, it's to ensure, if circumstances require, that France would be capable of building and leading a first-rank coalition with its partners to defend the interests of Europe. It's a responsibility that only it would be able to assume in continental Europe, and we need the resources for that. It's why, at my request, the Chief of Staff has proposed a change in our armed forces model that favors coherence over mass, responsiveness without sacrificing endurance. It means, firstly, consolidating the core of our sovereignty, where the model of the previous military planning law focused on expeditionary forces in the fight against terrorism. It means strengthening our deterrence by giving ourselves the means to ensure its robustness, reliability, modernization in the changing conditions of today's world. Deterrence makes France a country that is different in Europe. Once again, by assessing the war in Ukraine, we measure its vital importance. It deserves the considerable efforts that we devote to it. From the technological standpoint and through the requirement it presents, it moves our armed forces upwards at a time when deterrence has never seemed so necessary. We must defend it with strength, and this means ensure that it is better understood by all. The sovereignty core is also the constant strengthening of permanent postures. This requires increased intelligence assets so that we can anticipate crises or threats. I've constantly insisted on the need for France to have its own intelligence capability, allowing us to be autonomous in decision-making and action. It allowed us the Hamilton operation in 2018. This military program law will massively increase intelligence expenditure by 60% overall, with the doubling of the division's budgets. Enhanced surveillance capabilities, also with drones and means of action in our areas of sovereignty, means of intervention in our overseas territories, or major capabilities where a first initial reaction must be supplemented by the dispatch of reinforcements, maintaining mutual support between armed forces and the internal security forces to better respond to crises, health or climate, for example. But sovereignty is also the ability to resist, our resilience, and firstly, cyber resilience. I'd like us to double our ability to process and respond to major cyber attacks, faced with all the threats that can affect our society and the destabilization that it might cause, the overall resistance of our society, the moral forces, and the ability to mobilize our nation in the face of the unexpected as it did during the pandemic. That's essential. For that, I'd like to double the operational reserve aimed at strengthening our active service armed forces and the increase of our reservists as well as coastal flotillas. In respect, universal national service will allow us to draw on youth to ensure protection against all perils, and I'll return to that in the coming weeks. Transformation means moving from a model that can deliver operations in an area where we had strong capabilities to evolve into contested environment, faced with proven adversaries that can be fearsome across the full spectrum. It's what I call the pivot to high intensity. We must be able to act faster, to be more responsive, strengthening the national emergency echelon, and to have the necessary means at short notice interventions, even far from the mainland. And for that, whilst increasing its capabilities and responsiveness to increase our durability to resist long-term efforts. And for that, we must boost our operational preparedness and capabilities, adapt our stages of alert to the threat intensity, build up our munitions, our logistics, and sustainability. We will achieve that if we can manage crises differently by controlling the footprint and duration of our distant operations, strengthening our special forces, giving them the best equipment, the best, the most appropriate, and of course, the one that draws all the consequences of the most advanced technologies. But against stronger adversaries, we will have to act more strongly to secure decisive military results. We must therefore harden our capability moving to the all-Rafale and keep that aircraft at the best global level, continue to modernize our armed forces with the special contribution in new cyber combats. We will increase the protection and power of our frigates. And of course, we'll develop the new generation aircraft carrier. We must also innovate by distance-guided munitions, by increasing the use of drones through a doubling of our investments, by investing in quantum artificial intelligence to ensure our cyber security and improve our intelligence capabilities. In hardening our capability, I've just given a few examples. The Armed Forces Minister in the coming weeks will set this out in detail. We'll also have to harden our operational support, the awareness of our armed forces, ensure better balance between munitions, operational and logistics operations, ensure better support, strengthen our health services. This will require a major consolidation of effort included in the forthcoming contracts. We will combine the military effects through the digitalization of the battlefield, through collaborative combat, such as the Scorpion land system and the future fighter aircraft that we're launching with Germany and Spain. We will strengthen our capabilities in high operational added value, ground-to-air defense, because our territory can be the subject of strikes from non-state actors. We will increase our capabilities of air defense by at least 50%, including in anti-drone strikes, long-range strikes, elimination of enemy air defenses, and subsea fighting will be part of that effort. The third pivot of the transformation concerns common areas, not necessarily through shock and fire that will be tested or contested. Our adversaries may wish to draw upon the full range of actions and interference, from intimidation, malicious maneuvers, to trap us on the margins of territories and law. We must be able to respond to this plurality. And therefore, we'll have to anticipate through the detection of low signals, through a proactive approach, through an effort in military, but also informational, digital, cultural, and industrial fields. And the armed forces have a major share here. We will strengthen our ability to survey and to respond, but take the initiative to convey clear strategic messages in outer space, digital and maritime areas. We will continue to increase our space-based capabilities, relying far more on new space services. Surveillance, communication, protection, now even more, will be the key missions that we will develop to make France a space power. We will develop further our resources in the digital space, attracting both civilian and military talents, being at the cutting edge of this field. In the maritime area, we must have the naval capabilities on a par with our maritime assets. France has the second economic exclusion zone in the world, thanks to our overseas territories. It's a major asset, but also a major responsibility in terms of the environment, climate protection, protecting our infrastructure and territories. We must master the subsea to a depth of 6,000 meters for military reasons, but to protect our critical subsea infrastructure. Armed forces must be better present and more present in our overseas territories, and that they represent a strategic constellation ensuring the watch and protection of our assets worldwide. I'll present the concrete deployment of this overseas strategy. Connecting all this, we must revamp the joint staff operations to fight against hybrid strategies. The final pivot of this transformation that I'd like to outline concerns the international partnerships. These partnerships can only be viewed as part of our Europe, partners with whom we share interests. What binds us, not only treaties, but a certain view of the world, to defend the continent and also to project elsewhere what is better at 27, heighten interoperability and the shared strategic culture. These past few years, we've made huge progress in this area by setting up a European Defence Fund, structured cooperation at the European Intervention Initiative through novel endeavors such as Takuba, and also through bilateral partnerships such as CAMO with Belgium. we must continue that. Our country will be able to ensure all these responsibilities in Europe and beyond. If tomorrow a major partner must look elsewhere, we need to be able to act with Europeans within NATO or outside the alliance, and if necessary, ensure the command capabilities to conduct together large-scale operations. For us, we will need to deploy inter-army operation of up to 20,000 soldiers. This gives you an idea of the scale of our ambition. Also, our other partnerships will need to be renewed. I will discuss elsewhere what binds us to Africa, but we will continue the partnerships that I cited earlier. Others will come, such as with Indonesia, to see how we can develop new capability cooperation, new forms of independence, and joint training operations. It's a great asset that makes full sense for countries such as ours that in the future don't want to be the prisoner of major rivalries between third countries. It's a full program of transformation that is proposed. This military program law will allow France to become a country that is even more solid on defending its sovereignty, relying on historic but renewed partnerships, and to lead its allies, if need be, in a large-scale operation and exercise its influence. A more sovereign country, more enterprising, agile, and capable of taking the initiative. This strategic upgrade must allow us to devote the necessary resources to addressing these threats. Then France will be able to freely exercise its purpose and its legacy. This high ambition has with it a requirement in framing its resources. There is no luxury or comfort in this plan. Only what is necessary at a time when every euro of the taxpayer must be saved. We had to find a compromise between the necessary scale and the necessary savings. I think we've achieved that. It required a lot of work by the armed forces. Decisions had to be made and modernization staggered over time. There are major expectations. They concern the armed forces, the weapons procurement executives that will have to shorten the time cycles, reduce the standard constraints, and focus on the end users. Once again, our Ukrainian friends are giving us a fine example. We can act faster at lower cost if together we can bring together those who use and those who innovate. Turning to the defense industry playing a key role, and I thank them this morning. They're a key component of our sovereignty. I say this clearly. To the requirements of the state, they must be available and effective. We must come to terms with this perpetual change, shorten manufacturing cycles, not to over-engineer the process, adapt our equipment and production cycle to the needs of our partners, the requirement of a conflict, and that over time I want to reduce acquisition costs through a combined effort between the state and industry. Last July, I mentioned a war economy. This is our collective horizon, but a war economy underpinned by such an investment by the nation is not the perpetual urgency which would lead us to spend badly, to ensure lasting sovereignty where we spend better, commitments clearly set out, constant adaptability, and costs better contained. We give visibility beyond a decade, and opposite that, we need sincerity and exacting standards. After that requirement on the means, we must continue to resolutely invest in our human wealth, our soldiers, naval and civilian personnel, to ensure the development and upskilling with as the main priority building loyalty. It's not just a question of pay or pensions, even if I'm mindful of that. Building loyalty is through the purpose of the work every day, the variety of missions and team cohesion, and I welcome the investment by the armed forces chiefs who are paying particular attention to morale within our units. Loyalty is based on reducing constraints that you impose on your family, and I set great store by the family plan and the plan for the wounded, as I said last July before many of you, and I thank the Minister and the Secretary of State for following up on that. Final requirement, of course, concerns that of execution. Our greatest risk in the face of an uncertain world was not to give ourselves the means for our ambition. That risk has been set aside, but we must, in concrete terms, set the conditions to deliver on our ambitions. Munitions, spare parts, the most concrete items for training and operations for each of you. Execution will be the core priority over the coming months. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like here, in conclusion, thank all those who've worked long and hard for this monumental effort. Thank the Armed Forces Minister, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, all the directors of the ministry. I know the hundreds of hours you've spent to question the model, challenge the figures, look at every column. On many occasions, I questioned the minister and the chief of defense. Thank you all for this work undertaken